Hi, my name is Nicole Johnson. This is my video presentation on my behavioral scientist that I selected for this assignment. His name was Fred Keller. Fred Keller was born in 1899 and he died in 1996. He was a behavioral scientist, known in some journals as a reinforcement theorist. He was also an author. He authored many research journals and several books, one of which is well known, and that was The Principles of Psychology. He co-authored that with William Schoenfeld. It was an undergraduate textbook that was utilized at Columbia University with undergraduate students who were doing who were conducting research using lab rats, known as the experimental analysis of behavior. He was born in New Jersey. He attended college later in life than most, but he did go on to earn his PhD from Harvard. Prior to that, he did his undergraduate and postgraduate work at Tufts University. He taught at Colgate University thereafter and later at Columbia University, where he retired from after 26 years of instruction. Columbia University still recognizes his contributions, particularly in the field of behavioral science. And as I mentioned before, Fred Keller and William Schoenfeld taught the first undergraduate behavioral science class or coursework at the university. One of Fred Keller's earliest influences was John Watson. If you recall, John Watson was the pioneer in the field of behaviorism. He wrote a book, Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, and Fred Keller absorbed the pages and the information. And at the time, it was still a new and radical approach of understanding human behavior, or understanding how humans were in the environment. And so you can imagine when he was at the university, he didn't get much support for it, and it was kind of frustrating to him until B.F. Skinner came along. And in B.F. Skinner, he found a partner, he found a colleague, someone who shared the same views as him, and together they supported each other's research and findings. Skinnerism is a term that I came across that pretty much stated it was support for Skinner and everything that Skinner did, all the research that he conducted. So B.F. Skinner was a big influence on Fred Keller's research and findings. Not only was he a professor, he was also an author. Like I mentioned, the Principles of Psychology book was written in 1950. It was an undergraduate textbook. It was co-authored with William Schoenfeld. It was used in the first course in behavioral psychology at the Columbia University. Undergraduate students worked with white lab rats as experimental subjects. Both believed that the work done in the lab with animals could be applied to human behavior. The work they did was instrumental for these two reasons. In the use of lab rats to demonstrate behavioral principles, which is the first of its kind at Columbia University, and the textbook, Principles of Psychology, which was easy to read, easy to understand. It contained many of the principles that we have seen in this class and this course. But at the time, it was profound to have a book written by the authors, used by the authors in the coursework, and it's still referenced to till today. When Skinner was a teen or young in his youth, he dropped out of school. In a journal article that I read, he felt that the learning that occurred in the classroom didn't match with his abilities. And he talks about his failures in school, in early schooling. But he wasn't lazy. He became a telegraph operator for Western Union, and he did serve in the Army. It is my belief that these two environmental impacts reinforced his interest in developing and improving the reception of Morse code. He analyzed data and observed the reception of data through the receiving operators who were working with Morse code. And he found that they committed errors in receiving of certain signals or certain letters that were coming through. So he devised a signal code learning approach training program and he using Skinner's term operant discrimination. This pretty much meant that he had training programs that provided immediate feedback to the training receiving operators, and they would get immediate feedback on every correct or incorrect signal. This method was an example or an application of reinforcement theory. This code voice method was successful, and the Army incorporated his training methods during World War II. PCI, or the Personalized System of Instruction, also known as the Kellogg Plan, was an instructional method. Earlier, Skinner had been interested in educational reform. He was concerned about the efficiency of student learning and how the student learned. So he had devised a teaching machine, which was a box where various paper discs were inserted and containing questions and answers. It required the student to write an answer on a paper tape to the question and then move the machine to reveal the answer. If it was correct, the student could proceed, and if it was incorrect, the student would have to stop and try again. This was all fashioned off the concept of contingencies of reinforcement. Keller was excited when this development occurred. Skinner was known for tinkering and building instruments and building various boxes, and this concept, this box that he built, was exciting to Keller. And in one of the journals that I came across, he even encouraged his students to come up with various boxes, box designs, to help to proceed with this way of learning. Well, he too comes up with this concept of personalized system of instruction, and it is a self-paced modules in which the learner would move at or learn at their own pace, dependent on their ability and time. Mastery would have to be demonstrated before proceeding to the next module. Lectures, proctors, and textbooks were still utilized, but they were vehicles to help the student rather than the source of knowledge for the student. So it was a form of personalized learning that he was really excited about and hoping that it would take off. And it did. At first it was accepted in various educational establishments, particularly in the field of engineering, and it seemed successful. However, by 1980s, it declined in its usage, and in one journal article, he laments about this, and he talks about the preferred system, which is the group system of instruction, the GSI, and he outlines the components of GSI and how those components that make up GSI were preferred to versus this method, which is the PSI. So the criticism that came from the GSI group, the group system of instruction, was that PSI was involved limited instructional methods, it took time, and it decreased teacher-student interaction. And professors preferred lectures and preferred the group concept of learning versus an individual, take your time, personalized learning. So it did not go much further. But today, I think many of us have been in one course or the other where we have been given the opportunity to proceed or to master a step before, or a method or a task or step in the course before proceeding to the next concept or the next unit in the book. So achieving the next unit, passing the test, and then proceeding to the following unit. That's what I wanted to say. Fred Keller's contributions to the ABA field. Learning Theories of Reinforcement, his introductory course at Columbia University, followed by the textbook developed by him and William Schoenfeld that included topics such as those listed on the slide in front of you. And you can recognize that some of those principles of behaviorism were also introduced and explained by Skinner. The Morse code, even though we don't use that today, we have to accept the implication it has left behind and that is as a model, that it is a model of reinforcement or operant discrimination. Here are some possible interview questions I would ask Skinner, such as, when did you first become interested in behavioral science? What was it about B.F. Skinner that captivated you? Which of your studies were you most proud of, or the accomplishments that I've just discussed? And with the tremendous changes in technology since you last wrote, what advice would you have for a future behavioral analyst in 2018? Here are the references I used. They were mostly journal articles written by Keller. They were not, I expected to find a lot of articles because it did say that he wrote a lot, but I found more articles that referenced him and his work than his own. But I did manage to find articles to gather the information I have, and furthermore that I used in my paper. And that's it. Thank you.